What happens when a man who can make or break a company with a single signature is judged by the color of his skin instead of the content of his character? What happens when a multi-millionaire CEO, dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans, is told he doesn't belong in the first-class seat he paid for? You're about to hear the story of Elias Vance, a titan of industry who was publicly humiliated on a flight kicked out of his own VIP seat for an entitled white passenger. But the flight crew and the smug passenger had no idea who they were dealing with. They froze in sheer terror when they discovered the truth, just before he fired them all instantly. This isn't just a story of revenge. It's a story of karma so powerful it rewrote destinies. The air in the Ascend Air Polaris Lounge at LAX hummed with a low, expensive frequency. It was a symphony of clinking crystal, the soft murmur of hushed conversations, and the whisper of leather as well-dressed travelers settled into oversized armchairs. This was a sanctuary for the elite, a bubble of privilege designed to insulate its occupants from the chaos of the airport beyond its frosted glass doors. In a quiet corner, away from the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac, sat a man who seemed entirely out of place. Elias Vance was dressed in a plain charcoal grey hoodie, worn-in denim jeans, and a pair of simple, unassuming sneakers. His face, clean-shaven with sharp, intelligent eyes, was focused on the tablet resting on his lap. He nursed a bottle of still water, having politely declined the champagne and artisanal hors d'oeuvres offered by the lounge attendant. To the casual observer, he was nobody. Perhaps a student who'd won a contest or an economy passenger who'd bluffed his way in. The other occupants, men in tailored Italian suits and women with purses that cost more than a mid-sized car, gave him passing dismissive glances. They saw the clothes, not the man. They didn't see the CEO of Viridian Dynamics, a revolutionary tech firm that had single-handedly disrupted the logistics and supply chain industry. They didn't see the man whose proprietary AI, Synapse OS, was about to be integrated into everything from global shipping to advanced robotics. And they certainly didn't know that Elias Vance was on his way to Seattle to finalize the single largest corporate travel contract in the airline industry for the next decade, an exclusive $50 million a year deal. Ascend Air was the front-runner. Their pitch had been flawless, their numbers impressive. Their CEO, a slick executive named Mark Covington, had personally courted Elias for months. But Elias wasn't a man swayed by spreadsheets and PowerPoints alone. He built his empire from a garage in Palo Alto to a glittering tower in downtown LA on one principle: observe the ground truth. He believed you could learn more about a company from a single unannounced interaction than from 100 boardroom meetings. So this flight 715 to Seattle, was the final test. He had booked his ticket under a simple pseudonym, E. Vance, using his personal credit card, deliberately avoiding all the pomp and ceremony that came with his official title. He wanted to experience Ascend Air, not as a VIP to be courted, but as a regular, full-fare, first-class passenger. He wanted to see if the polish and perfection they promised in their pitch extended to the actual customer experience. The $50 million contract hinged on the simple answer to one question: did Ascend Air truly value every customer? His phone buzzed softly. It was a text from his chief operating officer, Sarah Jenkins. They're sweating bullets at Apex. Heard you were flying Ascend today. Did Covington send you a gold-plated jet? Elias smiled faintly and typed back. No jet. Just testing the seats. We'll have a decision for you by the time we land. He closed his tablet and slipped it into his worn leather backpack. It was time for boarding. As he stood, a man in a crisp suit nearby grumbled to his companion, "Can't believe they let just anyone in here now." His voice loud enough for Elias to hear. Elias met the man's gaze for a fleeting second. He didn't scowl or retort. He simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and walked towards the gate. The storm was gathering, and he didn't even know it. He was just a quiet man, in a hoodie, walking into a test he had designed, completely unaware that he was about to become the subject of a far more brutal one. Boarding flight 715 was an orderly affair, at least initially. Elias, holding his boarding pass for seat 1A, was among the first of the first-class passengers to step onto the aircraft. He greeted the flight attendant at the door with a quiet "hello" and made his way to the very front of the plane. Seat 1A was a coveted spot, a spacious pod with direct aisle access, ample privacy, and a window that offered an unobstructed view. He stowed his backpack in the overhead bin, settled into the plush leather seat, and buckled his seatbelt, ready for the short flight to Seattle. He closed his eyes for a moment, mentally running through the final clauses of the Viridian Ascend Air proposal. The numbers were solid. The logistics were sound. All it needed was this final human element. That's when the fragile piece of the cabin was shattered. "Excuse me. I think you're in my seat." The voice was sharp, laced with an unmistakable note of condescending authority. Elias opened his eyes. Standing in the aisle was a woman in her late 40s, impeccably dressed in a cream-colored pantsuit, her blonde hair coiffed into a severe, unmoving style. A heavy gold bracelet jangled on her wrist as she gestured impatiently at his seat. Behind her stood a harried-looking flight attendant, whose name tag read, "Brenda." Elias offered a polite, neutral smile. "I don't think so. My boarding pass says 1A. He held it up for her to see. The woman whose name he would later learn was Karen Miller didn't even glance at it. "That's impossible," she snapped. "I am always in 1A. The airline knows this. I am a Platinum Elite executive member." She pronounced the title as if it were a royal decree. The flight attendant, Brenda, stepped forward, her face a mask of strained corporate politeness. "Sir, perhaps there has been a mistake. May I see your pass?" Elias handed it to her. Brenda studied it, her brow furrowed. "It does say 1A. She admitted, her tone suggesting the ticket itself was somehow lying. She then looked at the woman. "Ma'am, Mrs. Miller, what does your pass say?" Karen Miller huffed, fumbling in her designer handbag. "I don't need to look at it. There's been a computer glitch. This gentleman needs to move." She didn't look at Elias. She spoke about him as if he were a piece of luggage that had been misplaced. Elias remained calm, his voice even. "I'm sure we can sort this out. But the system assigned me this seat, and I'd prefer to stay here." Brenda turned her attention back to Elias, her professional smile tightening. "Sir, I understand, but Mrs. Miller is one of our most valued customers. It's possible the gate agent made an error. The seat directly behind you, 2A, is identical. Would you mind moving there to resolve this situation quickly?" The implication was clear. His value as a customer was secondary. The request was framed as a simple solution, but the underlying message was one of dismissal. "With all due respect," Elias said, his voice still quiet, but now with a firm edge, "this is the seat I was assigned and the seat I paid for. I'm not moving." Karen Miller gasped theatrically. "Well, I never. The nerve. I have a very important meeting in Seattle. I require my seat. Do you know who my husband is?" Brenda, the flight attendant, now saw the situation escalating. Instead of de-escalating by validating Elias's ticket and politely informing Mrs. Miller that seat 1A was taken, she made a fateful choice. She sided with the squeaky wheel. "Sir, I'm going to have to insist," Brenda said, her voice losing its faux sweetness and taking on a stern, authoritarian tone. "We need to get this flight out on time. If you refuse to cooperate, I'll have to call the captain." "Then you should call the captain," Elias replied coolly, turning his gaze towards the window, a clear signal that the conversation, from his perspective, was over. He wasn't trying to be difficult. He was running the test. He was observing the ground truth. And the truth he was observing was ugly. This was a clear case of bias. He knew with a sinking certainty that if he were a white man in a tailored suit, this conversation would be going very differently. They saw his hoodie and the color of his skin and made an instant calculation about his worth. Brenda flustered, and angry disappeared towards the cockpit. A few minutes later she returned, followed by Captain Robert Thorne, a man with silver hair and an air of supreme self-importance. He didn't even make eye contact with Elias, initially addressing Karen Miller first. "Mrs. Miller, my apologies for the delay. We'll get this sorted." He then pivoted to Elias, his expression one of weary impatience. "Son, what's the problem here?" The word son was a deliberate condescension. Elias felt a flash of hot anger but suppressed it. Maintaining composure was his superpower. "Captain, there is no problem," Elias stated clearly. "I am in my assigned seat, 1A. This woman claims it is hers. The flight attendant has confirmed my boarding pass is correct. I see no reason to move." Captain Thorne sighed dramatically. "Look, we have procedures. When there's a seating dispute with a Platinum Elite member, we accommodate them. It's just policy. Now are you going to move to 2A? Or are we going to have to deplane you and involve airport security?" The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The other first-class passengers were now openly staring, some with sympathy, others with annoyance at the delay. To be deplaned, to be publicly shamed and escorted off the aircraft like a criminal, all for sitting in the seat he had paid for. The ground truth was now crystal clear. The polish of Ascend Air was a paper-thin veneer. Underneath it was rotten with prejudice and a broken corporate culture that bowed to the loudest, most entitled voices. The $50 million decision had just been made. Elias slowly unbuckled his seatbelt. He looked at the captain, at Brenda's smug expression, and at Karen Miller's triumphant smirk. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. "Fine," he said, the word clipped and cold. "I will move." He stood up, grabbed his backpack from the overhead bin, and moved to seat 2A. As he sat down, he heard Karen Miller say to Brenda, "Thank you for handling that. Some people just don't understand how things work." Elias pulled out his tablet. He connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi, a service Ascend Air proudly advertised as best in class. He was about to use it to bring their world crashing down. The test was over. The consequences were about to begin. As the plane taxied to the runway and began its powerful ascent into the grey Los Angeles sky, a tense quiet settled over the first-class cabin. Karen Miller was comfortably ensconced in seat 1A, sipping a pre-departure glass of champagne that Brenda had rushed to her with a conspiratorial smile. Captain Thorne had returned to the cockpit, his duty of enforcing the unspoken passenger hierarchy complete. They had won. They had put the man in the hoodie in his place. In seat 2A, Elias Vance was a portrait of stoic calm. Anyone watching him would have assumed he was defeated, a man who had been cowed into submission. They couldn't have been more wrong. The anger was there, a cold, focused fury coiling in his gut. But it was being channeled. Elias hadn't built Viridian dynamics by losing his temper. He'd built it with methodical precision by turning problems into data points, and data points into decisive action. His tablet screen glowed in the dim cabin light. He wasn't browsing movies or checking social media. He was in a secure, encrypted chat with his executive team. His fingers moved with silent speed across the virtual keyboard. Elias Vance. "Sarah, are you available for an immediate priority call? Also loop in legal. Now." The reply from Sarah Jenkins, his fiercely loyal and ruthlessly efficient COO, was instantaneous. Sarah Jenkins. Standing by. What's wrong? Is it the deal? Elias Vance. The deal is off. Permanently. He could almost feel the shockwave from that message travel through the ether. For months, the Ascend Air contract had been the company's primary strategic focus. It was a game changer, not just for the money, but for the prestige. Sarah Jenkins. What happened? Did their numbers not hold up? Did you find a flaw in the service agreement? Elias began to type, detailing the entire incident with the dispassionate clarity of an incident report. He named the flight number, the time, and the individuals involved. He described Karen Miller's entitlement, Brenda's biased intervention, and Captain Thorne's threat to have him deplaned. He didn't embellish or add emotional commentary. He just stated the facts. The facts were damning enough. Elias Vance. The incident has provided a non-negotiable data point. The corporate culture at Ascend Air is fundamentally broken. Their internal policies promote discrimination and value certain customers over others based on arbitrary status, and it appears racial bias. This is not a partner we can align with. Their brand is a liability to the Viridian brand. End of discussion. A new participant joined the chat. It was Daniel Healy, Viridian's head of corporate law. Daniel Healy Legal, Elias. I've read your summary. This is appalling. It's also a breach of the common carrier laws. But more to the point, you're right, it's a massive brand risk. Elias Vance. Daniel, I want you to draft a letter to Mark Covington, CEO of Ascend Air. It will be sent the moment we land. It will state in no uncertain terms that due to a catastrophic failure in customer service and a clear demonstration of discriminatory practices experienced firsthand by our CEO, Viridian Dynamics is immediately and irrevocably terminating all negotiations. There will be no further meetings. There will be no appeal. Sarah Jenkins understood. What about Apex Airlines? Their offer is still on the table. It's slightly less favorable on the cost side, but their reputation for service is stellar. Elias Vance, call Apex's CEO Maria Flores. Tell her that if she can get her team on a video call with me within 1 hour of my landing in Seattle, the $50 million contract is hers. No negotiations. She just has to sign the existing term sheet we sent them 2 weeks ago. Tell her Viridian values partnership, and we've just discovered our values are aligned with hers. This was how Elias Vance operated. No hesitation. No second guessing. He had his data point, and he was executing the only logical conclusion. For the remainder of the 1-hour flight, as Brenda fawned over Mrs. Miller in seat 1A, refilling her champagne and laughing at her stories, Elias Vance calmly dismantled Ascend Air's future. He dictated the precise wording of the termination letter to Healy. He instructed his PR team to prepare a holding statement in case of a media leak focusing on Viridian's commitment to equality and partnership integrity. He reviewed the Apex Airlines proposal one last time, making minor annotations. He was performing corporate surgery at 30,000 feet. He was severing a diseased limb before it could poison his own company. He felt no pleasure in it, only a grim sense of necessity. He thought of all the years he'd been told he didn't belong in advanced math classes, in venture capital meetings, in boardrooms. He had fought and clawed his way to the top, so he would never have to feel that way again. And yet here he was in a first-class cabin, being treated like a trespasser. But this time was different. This time he wasn't just a target. He was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. As the plane began its descent into Seattle, the seatbelt sign chimed on. Brenda walked through the cabin collecting glasses. She glanced at Elias, a flicker of contempt in her eyes. He met her gaze, his face, an unreadable mask. she saw a quiet, defeated man in a hoodie. He saw a woman who had just cost her company $50 million and had absolutely no idea. The silence of his fury was about to become the loudest noise she had ever heard. The moment Flight 715 connected to the jet bridge at SeaTac Airport, the carefully constructed world of several Ascend Air employees began to fracture. Most passengers were already standing eager to deplane. Elias Vance remained seated calmly, waiting for the aisle to clear. He watched as Karen Miller gathered her things, shooting him one last triumphant glare as she swept past him and off the plane. Brenda and the other flight attendants stood near the door, bidding farewell with practiced smiles. Captain Thorne's voice came over the intercom with a final, smooth sign-off. To them it was just another uneventful flight. Elias was one of the last to leave the aircraft. As he stepped into the terminal, he was met not by a car service, but by a formidable welcoming party. Standing there was Sarah Jenkins, his COO, who had taken the Viridian corporate jet and beaten his commercial flight by an hour. Beside her were two sharp-looking men in dark suits from Viridian's legal team. But they weren't the ones who commanded attention. Standing slightly in front of them, his face pale and anxious, was David Chen, the highest-ranking Ascend Air executive at the airport, the general manager for SeaTac operations. Sarah had clearly called ahead. "Mr. Vance." Chen began stepping forward with a hand outstretched and a deeply worried expression. "I was just made aware. There may have been some misunderstanding on your flight." Elias completely ignored his outstretched hand. His eyes scanned the area until they found who he was looking for. Brenda was walking towards the crew lounge, laughing with another attendant. Captain Thorne was heading the same way, pulling his roller bag behind him. "Sarah," Elias said, his voice low and devoid of emotion. "Ask them to join us." Sarah nodded to one of the lawyers who quickly and politely intercepted the flight crew. "Captain Thorne, Ms. Hoskins, Mr. Vance would like a word with you." Confusion turned to annoyance on their faces. They trudged back over their expressions, clearly broadcasting their irritation at being delayed. "Is there a problem?" Captain Thorne asked, his tone clipped. He looked at Elias, then at the assembled group, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face for the first time. Elias Vance finally spoke, his voice no longer quiet, but ringing with an authority that seemed to suck the air out of the bustling terminal around them. "The problem, Captain," Elias began, his eyes locking with Thorne's, "is that you are the face of a company that I was hours away from entrusting with a $50 million annual contract." David Chen, the airport manager, looked like he was going to be physically sick. Brenda's jaw went slack, her smile vanishing. Captain Thorne's confident posture deflated. "The problem, Ms. Hoskins," Elias continued, turning his glacial gaze to the flight attendant, "is that your decision to prioritize a passenger's ego over a valid ticket cost your employer that contract. Your actions were a direct reflection of your company's culture. And I have concluded that your culture is bankrupt." Brenda's face was a mess of confusion and horror. I don't understand. Who are you?" It was Sarah Jenkins who answered, her voice like ice. "This is Elias Vance, founder and CEO of Viridian Dynamics, and you, Ms. Hoskins, along with your captain, have just become the stars of the most expensive customer service failure in your airline's history." Elias looked past them to the terrified airport manager. "Mr. Chen, a formal letter of contract termination was sent to your CEO, Mark Covington, exactly 10 minutes ago. It details the unprofessional, discriminatory, and frankly bigoted treatment I received on Flight 715. It specifies that the actions of your flight crew, particularly Captain Thorne and flight attendant Brenda Hoskins, are the sole and direct cause. He then looked back at the now ghostly white faces of the two people who had humiliated him. "You didn't just move a passenger from seat 1A to 2A. Elias said the words precise and devastating. "You moved your company from partner to pariah. You deplanned a $50 million deal. You chose to back the wrong person." He paused, letting the weight of his words crush them. "I don't have the power to fire you from your jobs," he said, and for a half-second, a flicker of relief crossed Brenda's face. But it was instantly extinguished by his next sentence. "I don't need to. I've just fired your company's future. When the board of directors asks your CEO why Ascend Air is posting its worst quarterly loss in 5 years and why its stock is about to tank, he will have 2 names to give them: Thorne and Hoskins. You're not fired, you're finished." He gave them one last look, a look not of anger, but of finality. It was the look of a man closing a door forever. "Sarah the Apex call," he said, turning his back on them completely. As Elias Vance and his team walked away, they left behind a tableau of pure devastation. David Chen was frantically speaking into his phone, his voice cracking. Captain Thorne stood rigid, his face ashen, the color drained from it. And Brenda Hoskins, the flight attendant who was just following policy, slowly sank onto a nearby bench. The full catastrophic gravity of her actions had finally landed. She hadn't just made a mistake. She had lit the fuse on a bomb, and it had just detonated, taking her career, her captain's career, and her airline's reputation with it. The instant firing wasn't about a pink slip. It was about the instantaneous and total obliteration of their professional value. They had been weighed, measured, and found worthless. The news of the Viridian Dynamics pullout didn't just hit Ascend Air, it shattered it. Within 3 hours, CEO Mark Covington was on an emergency call with his board, trying and failing to explain how a done deal, a $50 million lifeline that was meant to be the centerpiece of their annual report, had evaporated between LAX and SeaTac. Elias Vance's termination letter was brutal in its specificity. It was a cold, legal and detailed account of the incident, painting a picture of a corporate culture that was not just flawed, but actively hostile to certain customers. The words discriminatory practices and brand liability were legal and PR poison. The immediate internal fallout was swift and merciless. Captain Robert Thorne was grounded indefinitely, pending a full investigation that everyone knew was just a formality before his forced retirement or termination. His decades-long career, once a source of immense pride, was now a case study in corporate disgrace. Brenda Hoskins was suspended without pay and told not to speak to anyone. She was escorted from the crew lounge by security, her colleagues staring at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. She was no longer a person. She was the scapegoat for a $50 million disaster. But the story was too big, too dramatic to be contained within corporate walls. Another first-class passenger, a tech blogger who had witnessed the whole confrontation, had discreetly filmed the captain's threat to deplane Elias. He hadn't known who Elias was at the time, but after seeing him, met by a professional entourage at the gate, he put 2 and 2 together. He wrote a scathing blog post titled, "I watched Ascend Air throw away millions to appease a Karen in first class." He uploaded the 30-second video clip. It went viral overnight. By morning, "Your Ascend Air fail" was the #1 trending topic on Twitter. The video was everywhere. News outlets picked up the story. Ascend Air's stock opened 15% down, wiping out nearly $500 million in market value in a matter of hours. The Public Relations Department issued a weak, jargon-filled statement about reviewing our policies and a commitment to customer service, which only fanned the flames of public outrage. The internet, with its relentless crowdsourced fury, did what it does best. Sleuths on Reddit and Twitter identified the woman in seat 1A. It was indeed a Karen Miller. But she wasn't just any wealthy passenger. She was the wife of Jonathan Miller, the CEO of Miller Logistics, a mid-sized but highly respected firm that provided specialized shipping components. And here karma began to weave its intricate and merciless web. The public shaming of Karen Miller was intense. Her social media was flooded. Her husband's company was review-bombed. But the real consequence was far more personal and devastating. Back at the gleaming headquarters of Viridian Dynamics, Elias Vance was leading a meeting about the new partnership with Apex Airlines. The deal had been signed within hours of his landing. But an analyst from his supply chain division flagged something. Mr. Vance?" The young analyst said, his voice nervous. "There's something you should see. The woman from the flight, Karen Miller. Her husband's company, Miller Logistics. They're one of our component suppliers, a Tier 3 contractor for the Synapse project." The room went silent. All eyes turned to Elias. His face remained impassive, but a cold fire ignited in his eyes. He had built his company on efficiency, but also on integrity. Every partner, every supplier was meant to reflect the values of Viridian Dynamics. He turned to Sarah Jenkins. "Sarah, what's the termination clause on our contract with Miller Logistics?" Sarah quickly brought up the file on her own tablet. Standard 30-day no-cause termination. But there's also a values and ethics clause. We can terminate immediately if a supplier or its key principals engage in conduct that brings Viridian Dynamics into public disrepute or violates our core principles of ethics and equality. Elias stared at the screen for a long moment. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about principle. The actions of Karen Miller, a key principal's spouse and public representative, had been broadcast globally. Her behavior was now inextricably linked to her husband's company, and by extension to his own. "Draft the letter," Elias said, his voice quiet but absolute. "Effective immediately, we are terminating our contract with Miller Logistics under the Values and Ethics Clause. Cite the public incident on Ascend Air Flight 748 as evidence of a profound misalignment of corporate and personal values. We cannot have our brand associated with that kind of behavior even indirectly." The cascade had just become an avalanche. Karen Miller's sense of entitlement had not only disgraced her publicly and contributed to the downfall of 2 airline employees, it was now reaching into her own home, about to destroy the very foundation of the privileged life she had fought so viciously to protect. Her husband's company, which had been their source of wealth and status, was about to be cut off at the knees, all because she couldn't stand the sight of a black man in a hoodie sitting in her favorite seat. For Jonathan Miller, the call came on a Tuesday morning while he was in a meeting reviewing quarterly projections. His assistant interrupted her face ashen, saying it was urgent. It was a senior vice president from Viridian Dynamics. The conversation was short, brutal, and final. Their multi-million-dollar contract representing over 60% of Miller Logistics' annual revenue was terminated, effective immediately. When he asked why, the VP simply said, "I suggest you speak to your wife about her conduct on Ascend Air Flight 715. The line went dead. Jonathan stumbled out of the conference room in a daze. He found the viral videos and news articles his staff were now frantically sharing. He saw his wife's face, twisted in a mask of haughty indignation. He heard her voice dripping with privilege, and he felt the foundation of his life crumble into dust. When he confronted Karen at their sprawling suburban mansion, the confrontation was explosive. She initially tried to defend herself, blaming the rude man, the incompetent airline, and a world that was too sensitive. But when Jonathan laid out the consequences, That Viridian Dynamics, their lifeline, was gone, her bravado shattered. He explained that her name was now synonymous with bigotry, and that no major corporation would risk doing business with a company so publicly toxic. He wasn't just losing a contract, he was losing his company. Their life, funded by decades of his hard work, and her casual entitlement was over. The house would have to be sold, the country club membership cancelled, the luxury cars repossessed. The entire edifice of their social standing had been demolished by a single selfish act of prejudice on an airplane. The karma for Karen Miller wasn't just public shame, it was the complete dismantling of her identity. She had defined herself by her wealth, her status, and her ability to command deference. Now she had nothing. The husband whose name she had invoked as a threat now looked at her with pure contempt, the architect of his ruin. Meanwhile, the shockwaves at Ascend Air continued to spread. The stock price failed to recover. Bookings plummeted as customers, particularly corporate clients, fled to rivals like Apex Airlines, who were now proudly advertising their new, massive partnership with Viridian Dynamics. The board of directors had no choice but to take drastic action. Mark Covington, the CEO, was fired. A new interim CEO was brought in with a single mandate: detoxify the brand and rebuild the corporate culture from the ground up. The investigation into Flight 715 concluded with the inevitable. Brenda Hoskins was formally terminated, her career in aviation over. No other major airline would hire her. The last anyone heard, she was working as a cashier at a discount department store, her face a permanent mask of weary resignation. Captain Robert Thorne was allowed to take a voluntary early retirement to save face, but his legacy was forever tarnished. He went from a respected veteran pilot to a cautionary tale whispered in crew lounges. But the story had one more twist. 6 months later, Elias Vance received an unexpected letter. It was from the new CEO of Ascend Air, a woman named Isabella Rossi, known for her expertise in corporate turnarounds. The letter was not a plea to reconsider the contract. It was something far more humbling. Mr. Vance, it read, what happened on Flight 715 was a symptom of a deep-seated disease within our company. Your response, while devastating to us financially, was the shock to the system we desperately needed. You didn't just cost us a contract. You held up a mirror, and we were horrified by what we saw. I am writing not to ask for your business, but to ask for your help. Would you be willing to meet with my new executive team? And me, we don't want your money. We want your perspective. We want to learn from our failure. And we believe the lesson must start with the man we failed so profoundly. Elias read the letter twice. He could have ignored it. He could have reveled in their desperation. That would have been revenge. But Elias Vance was not a man driven by revenge. He was driven by a desire to build things that worked, to fix things that were broken. He picked up his phone and called Sarah Jenkins. Sarah, clear my schedule for next Thursday. I'm going to meet with the new leadership at Ascend Air. Sarah was stunned. Elias, why, they don't deserve a minute of your time. It's not for them, Elias replied, his voice calm and thoughtful. It's to make sure that the next person who looks like me, wearing a hoodie and flying first class, doesn't have to go through what I did. The problem is bigger than one airline. If we can help them fix their culture, we create a better standard for everyone. That's a return on investment you can't measure in dollars. This was the final reckoning. True power wasn't just about the ability to destroy, it was about the wisdom and grace to rebuild. By agreeing to the meeting, Elias wasn't just closing a chapter. He was starting a new one, turning a moment of personal humiliation into a catalyst for industry-wide change. The hard karma had hit, but what grew from the wreckage was something far more valuable than a $50 million contract progress. The meeting was set for a Thursday afternoon in a location of Elias's choosing. He didn't select a power broker steakhouse or a sterile corporate high-rise. He chose the Aria Suite at the Palfrey Hotel, a boutique establishment known for its understated elegance and discretion. The room was designed not for intimidation, but for conversation. Soft grey walls, a simple mahogany table, comfortable but not ostentatious chairs, and a single large window that looked out not onto a sprawling cityscape, but a quiet, contemplative Zen garden. The message was clear: this was not a negotiation. It was a reckoning, and perhaps a reflection. Elias and Sarah arrived precisely on time. Elias, in his usual uniform of dark denim, and a well-fitting Henley, radiated a calm, implacable energy. Sarah, ever the protector, carried a leather portfolio and an expression that was a mixture of skepticism and fierce loyalty. They were greeted at the door by Isabella Rossi herself. She was a stark contrast to her predecessor. Where Mark Covington had been slick and polished, Rossi was sharp with intelligent eyes that held a hint of weariness, but no trace of artifice. Her handshake was firm, her greeting direct. "Mr. Vance, Ms. Jenkins, thank you for coming. My team is inside." The Ascend Air executive team was already seated. There were 4 of them: a new head of operations, a newly appointed chief people officer, the general counsel who had survived the purge, and the head of in-flight services. They rose as Elias entered their faces, a collective mask of tension and solemn respect. There were no weak smiles, no attempts at small talk. They understood the gravity of the moment. They were the surgeons called in to save a patient who had been pronounced dead on arrival, and the man before them was the one who had signed the death certificate. After brief introductions, everyone took their seats. A hotel attendant offered water, which was accepted in near silence. The air was thick with unspoken apologies and the crushing weight of a $50 billion corporate disaster. Isabella Rossi began. "Mr. Vance, I'll be direct. We are not here to ask you to reverse your decision. We understand that trust, once so thoroughly broken, cannot be bought back. We are here, frankly, because we are a broken company. Your letter to my predecessor was surgical. It exposed a cancer that many of us suspected was there, but had allowed to metastasize. What happened to you on Flight 715 was not an anomaly. It was the inevitable outcome of a culture we allowed to fester. A culture of hierarchies, of valuing the wrong things, of celebrating status over decency." She paused, taking a breath. "We are here to listen. We need to understand the full depth of our failure, not just from a business perspective, but from a human one. We need you to help us see what we were blind to." Elias listened, his hands resting calmly on the table. He looked at each executive, his gaze lingering for a second, assessing them. He wasn't looking for fear or shame. He was looking for a genuine desire to change. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet, yet commanding the entire room. "Ms. Rossi, what you call a failure, felt from my seat like a calculated act of dehumanization. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Your flight attendant, Ms. Hoskins, made a choice. Your pilot, Captain Thorne, made a choice. They looked at me, and they looked at Mrs. Miller, and they ran a subconscious calculation. They weighed my hoodie against her pantsuit. They weighed my skin color against hers, and in their calculus I was worth less." He leaned forward slightly, his intensity drawing them in. "This isn't about my feelings. I've dealt with this my entire life. It's the invisible tax you pay. It's the venture capitalist who tells you you're very articulate, as if it's a surprise. It's the security guard who follows you in a high-end store. It's the captain of an airplane threatening to have you arrested for sitting in a seat you paid thousands for. The incidents change, but the tax remains the same. He then told them a story they couldn't find in any report. He spoke of his first big pitch for Viridian Dynamics, walking into a boardroom in Silicon Valley. He was young, brilliant, and had a revolutionary idea. But all the investors saw was a black kid in a borrowed suit. They spent the first 10 minutes asking him if he was in the right room, if he was the IT support. He had to swallow his anger, that familiar hot coil in his stomach, and deliver the pitch of his life just to be seen as legitimate. I built my entire company on a single principle. Elias continued, his voice resonating with the conviction of a man who had lived his words. The system must be better than the biases of the people within it. A good system protects everyone. It empowers the employee at the lowest level to make the right decision, even if it's the hard one. Your system did the opposite. It empowered your crew to make the wrong bias decision because it was the easiest path. It rewarded the appeasement of the entitled. Your problem wasn't Brenda Hoskins or Captain Thorne. They were symptoms. Your disease was a culture that created them. The new chief people officer, a woman named Anya Sharma, spoke up, her voice earnest. So how do we begin to cure it? We're rewriting the training manuals, the handbooks. But how do we change what's in people's hearts? Elias turned his gaze to her. You don't. You can't legislate morality. But you can make the cost of acting on one's prejudice so high that it's untenable. You build a new system. You train for de-escalation, but you also train for validation. The first question your crew should have asked wasn't, how can we appease Mrs. Miller? But is Mr. Vance's ticket valid? The moment the answer was yes, the conversation should have been over for him and started with her. Your crew needs to know with absolute certainty that if they make the right call and stand up for a passenger being harassed or mistreated, the company will have their back 100% of the time, even if that passenger is a Platinum Elite member threatening to take their business elsewhere. He pointed a finger at the head of operations, and you have to give them the power. Create a zero-tolerance policy, not just for discrimination, but for what I call status abuse. The kind of behavior Karen Miller displayed should result in an automatic lifetime ban from your airline. You have to be willing to fire your worst customers. Only then will your best customers and your employees believe you're serious. For the next hour, it became a workshop. They drilled down into specifics. Elias challenged them on scenarios. They discussed anonymous reporting systems, accountability metrics for managers, and a new compensation structure that rewarded positive customer and crew feedback, not just on-time departures. By the end, the atmosphere had transformed. The tension had been replaced by a daunting but clear sense of purpose. As they stood to leave, Isabella Rossi offered her hand to Elias once more. Mr. Vance, you have given us a brutally honest and invaluable gift. We will not squander it. Elias shook her hand. I hope you don't, Miss Rossi. The world is watching. And they did not squander it. Over the next 18 months, Ascend Air became a phoenix rising from the ashes of its own disgrace. Under Rossi's leadership, they implemented the Dignity First protocol. Training became immersive, using virtual reality to put crew members in the shoes of marginalized passengers. The new policies were advertised openly, so customers knew the rules had changed. They fired several high-status, perpetually abusive customers in the first few months, sending a shockwave through their elite customer base. The message was clear: everyone is equal at 30,000 feet. The airline's story, once a viral tale of shame, slowly became a celebrated case study in corporate accountability at business schools across the country. Karma, in its patient and meticulous way, settled all remaining accounts. Jonathan Miller's company was liquidated. After the divorce, he moved to a small town in the Midwest, taking a modest job as a regional manager for a trucking company, humbled and forever haunted by his wife's arrogance. Karen Miller's fall was the most profound. Stripped of her husband's name and fortune, she was forced to re-enter a workforce she hadn't been a part of in 25 years. She eventually found a job as a receptionist at a busy dental clinic in a town where no one knew her name. Her days were a monotonous cycle of answering phones, scheduling appointments, and politely asking people to take a seat. She wore a simple, ill-fitting polyester uniform. One afternoon, while waiting for the dentist to finish with a patient, she glanced at the magazine on the waiting room table. It was Forbes. On the cover was Elias Vance, lauded for Viridian Dynamics' new philanthropic foundation dedicated to funding STEM education for underprivileged youth. The headline read, "The Architect of the Future." Karen stared at the face of the man she had dismissed, the man from Seat 1A, now celebrated as a global leader. In that moment, surrounded by the smell of antiseptic and the sound of a dental drill, she felt the full, crushing weight of her choices. It wasn't anger or hate she felt anymore. It was a vast, empty chasm of regret. That was her life sentence. Elias Vance never looked back, but he did move forward differently. The incident had awakened a new dimension of his purpose. He became a powerful voice for ethical leadership, using his platform to advocate for systemic change in corporate America. He still wore his hoodies and jeans, but now when he walked into a boardroom, no one ever asked if he was in the right place. They knew he was there to build a better one. On a flight to a conference in Singapore a few years later, Elias found himself on an Ascend airplane. He hadn't booked it intentionally. His assistant had, noting their vastly improved safety and service records. As he settled into his seat, 1A, he observed the flight crew. He watched a young flight attendant handle a difficult, demanding passenger with a calm, practiced firmness that was rooted in unshakable policy. He saw her treat every single person from the celebrity in 2B to the nervous student flyer in 34C with the same level of professional respect. As the plane reached cruising altitude, the lead flight attendant quietly came to his seat. She was a woman he didn't recognize. "Mr. Vance," she said softly, so no one else could hear. "I'm the new head of in-flight service for this region. I just wanted to say on behalf of our entire crew, thank you. You didn't just change our company. You changed our careers for the better." Elias looked at her, and for the first time since that fateful day, he smiled a genuine warm smile. He simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of a long and difficult journey come full circle. He turned his gaze out the window at the endless blue horizon, a world of possibilities. The storm had passed, the air was clear, and so the story of Elias Vance comes to a close. It's a stark reminder that the choices we make, even in a fleeting moment, can create ripples we can never undo. For a flight attendant, a pilot, and an entitled passenger, a single act of prejudice led to their complete and utter downfall. The karma wasn't loud or explosive. It was methodical, logical, and absolute. This story shows that true power isn't about status or wealth. It's about the unwavering dignity you hold when the world tries to strip it away. Elias Vance didn't just get revenge. He sparked a revolution in corporate culture, proving that one man's integrity can be more powerful than an entire corporation's bottom line. If you were moved by this incredible story of justice and the powerful hand of karma, please show your support. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more true-life stories where consequences are delivered, and the final verdict is always just. What did you think of the captain's decision? Let us know in the comments below.